As a newcomer to Java, it can feel daunting not knowing about all the cool libraries that are out there. In this episode, we'll break down how you can get a ton of libraries under your belt fast. Coming up.
Java Easy. News, tutorials, tips. Everything you need to know as a beginner Java developer.
Hi there, welcome back. Alright, before we begin, just a quick shout out to say that we want to let you know about the Java Beginner Starter Kit. So if you haven't downloaded this yet and you're completely new to Java, then go over to our website, that's javaeasily.com, and go grab the Java Beginner Starter Kit from there. It's a nice beginner-friendly guide designed to get you up and running with Java as quickly as possible, and it's completely free and should get you up and running with Java programming in no time at all. And now that's that out of the way, let's get into the episode then. So in this episode, we're talking about getting familiar with libraries. And maybe the place to start really is like, why is this important? Why do we need to have a knowledge of libraries? Why can't we just carry on with core Java and just carry on with the existing knowledge that we've got? Why do we need to even consider why knowing about libraries is important? Well, really, there's a few reasons. The more libraries you know, the less code you have to write, and the more valuable you'll be. And for me, that's the main reason. The more I know about libraries that are out there, the more alternatives I have for implementation, the more suggestions I can make when I'm in a team, and the more options I've got, the more degrees of freedom, if you like, implementation-wise, of how I can approach a particular implementation or how I can implement a particular piece of work. I don't want to have to write libraries for parsing HTML, for example, or understanding how to interpret an Outlook message file, or whatever it might be. There's always going to be libraries out there which can help you, and knowing about these is going to make you a much more efficient and valuable developer to your team and to your organization, which is a good reason. But moreover, it's just going to make you quicker as a developer, and you're going to spend less time constantly, reinventing the wheel, as they say, because you'll be relying on somebody else's implementation, which you know about and can then integrate in your own application, as opposed to having to write the code yourself, which is always going to be better. So having a lot of libraries under your belt is good, because you then start getting into a mode as a developer of kind of less development per se, less lower level development that is, less being stuck in the details or in the weeds of things, and more along the lines of a Lego assembler. When you have like Lego bricks, the toys, the little Lego bricks that you can stick together and make buildings out of them or whatever. That's really what being a developer these days is about. It's really basically taking different libraries and different components from different places and effectively being able to integrate and stitch them together to make a cohesive solution to a given business problem. That's really what your job is as a developer these days. And of course, instead of building the Lego blocks yourself, it's much better to just have a set of Lego blocks available to you of different types, and then you can pick or select out the different blocks that you see fit and that you're familiar with and that you've used in other projects before, for example, to be able to assemble a new solution for whatever business problem you've got at a particular point in time. So it's much better to do that. So what can we do to expand our knowledge of libraries? So there's a few things. A lot of it really is just about being aware and, never really settling for, how can I put this? Never really settling for just always doing the same thing or always observing the same stuff, or more specifically, always ignoring the same stuff. It's amazing how much stuff as developers we tend to ignore. Once we have a familiar way of approaching something or we're familiar with the code base, we don't tend to look around at other things, which is it's ironic that the knowledge that we build up kind of blinds us to the other knowledge that we could see, which we don't currently have. And oftentimes it's just about being aware, So for example, looking at the projects you're working on, look at the POM XML file, look at the POM XML file or the build.gradle file. Actually look and read out to yourself the individual dependencies that are listed there in the POM file or in the build.gradle file, and, relate them to which libraries are being used. And if you see some which you are not sure what they do, like, what does that particular thing do there, for example, then don't be shy to just hop on Google and just do a quick search for it. And then, if you have a good knowledge of the dependencies in that pom.xml file or the build.gradle file, just by osmosis, you're going to then build up your knowledge in that way too. So yeah, a good exercise is to read all the dependencies and see if you know what each dependency does. And if you don't, go and have a look at it. And you're soon going to build up your knowledge in that way, and you're going to stumble upon the documentation. And, that can oftentimes lead to some interesting discoveries in and of themselves as well of their own right. Now, a good dev should be able to read through the dependencies in a Maven file and know what's being used and why. Okay, I think that kind of separates senior developers from more junior developers, because senior developers, pretty much most dependencies, we just know what they do, why they're used, and how they're being used, and that kind of thing. The more problems that you see, or the more build.gradles that you see, the more you do this exercise, the more you're going to learn by osmosis, as we said. And, just being exposed to professional projects is a great way to build up your library knowledge as well. Another option, look at open source projects. So oftentimes these are better since they're done by technologists who really love the craft. They're very passionate developers. So that's good. You can get some really, innovative code in there, which you can be exposed to. But also there's a cost to that. And the cost is that oftentimes these projects might be kind of bleeding edge and might be using, libraries that aren't really fully matured. They're experimental in nature, or they're really at the bleeding edge of stuff as well. So just be aware of that. In commercial projects, we tend to use things that are much more stable, much more commonplace, and there's more of a kind of like a standard set of dependencies and libraries that we use. So just be aware of that whenever you're looking at open source projects. But it's nice to be able to look at open source projects and use the investigation tools that we have spoken about previously in the podcast, and the investigation techniques to be able to just analyze the code base and find out how other projects work. Now, it's nice to get a different style, or rather to be exposed to a different style of implementation other than just what you're doing at work. And open source projects and seeing open source code is a nice way to get you exposed to that. Another idea with libraries is just to get started and just to get hands-on, just to try and get your hands dirty as soon as possible. So read getting started guides for libraries, look at the Java docs. Oftentimes, really, they're kind of less useful, but the getting started guides are very good. If you go to, the components library, there's some really good stuff there for getting started and everything, on the kind of like mini websites for each different component. So that's a nice place to be able to start if you look at the getting started guides for new libraries. Try out a simple use case. Okay, so actually try out some code, start simple, and then build up from there. That could be useful. So for example, if you had to write an email parser, maybe you do it in phases. First of all, you try and at least get the file loaded first of all. So if you imagine you've got a message file, an .msg file from Outlook, and you've got a library which can read those or gives you an API into working with Outlook message files, then first of all, just bare bones, create a project, a dependency to that library, and then look at the getting started guide and just basically try and at least load in the message file as a first pass, and then you've got the dependency working okay, you've got any dependencies which it needs which are working okay. You can then actually load this file into memory, and you can then get a debug session, just put a breakpoint just after there, after it's loaded this file, and you can just have a look around and inspect what's inside the object model, which is the kind of like in-memory representation of that file. That's one approach you could do, for example, in that specific use case of like how would you get started to parse Outlook message files, for example. So look at the model produced, look at the call stacks, see what state they contain, see what objects they contain, and also have a think, why might they contain specific items? If the variables inside an object or the data members inside an object are named sensibly, they should really describe, what they're holding. And then from there you can kind of infer, well, why would they be holding that particular piece of state in that specific object? And then maybe you can work backwards, or work outwards rather, and then like relate it to other components you might see inside the Java doc. So again, with investigation, it's about being, kind of trying to be all over the place at the same time, or rather trying to think across the whole piece, and any bit of information you can glean, try to kind of stitch it together into some kind of mental model is what you're really trying to do here. Your job really is to assemble this mental model of how it works. So you've really always got to be the detective, as it were. So those are just a few ideas of how you might get started to increase your knowledge of libraries inside Java. But anyway, hope that was useful. And until next time, take care and speak soon. Bye.